And we're back like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your rainy, miserable Saturday afternoon here with me in New York. Well, once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Today is Kevin Costner's 70th birthday. And a couple of people have actually brought up the fact that they, without looking, if they had just been asked the question, how old is Kevin Costner? They would have put him not even closer to 75, but closer to 80. In other words, the way that memory works is there are certain people, maybe you associate certain roles, certain films, and you assume that, let's say, two actors are the same age or very close to being the same age. Forgive me as I put my Angel Heart poster back. We can't really have an episode without this. I'm just kidding. But Kevin Costner is 70 today. And one of my friends actually pointed out that he felt that Costner and Kevin Kline, who was his co-star in the terrific Lawrence Kasdan Western Silverado, and Costner famously was cut almost entirely out of the 2 years prior film, The Big Chill. The thing is, to my eyes, Kevin Costner in Silverado looks about 10 years younger than Kevin Kline. So the discrepancy, it's logical. So I believe Kevin Kline was born in 1946, so he'll be turning 79 this year and is significantly older than Kevin Costner. Kevin Costner is a little bit elusive to try to sum him up or narrow him down. It's one of the reasons why he's such a fascinating individual to kind of look at and study, because he is the closest thing that the last 40 years of audiences, 40 plus years, have had to what audiences of the 40s, 50s, and 60s had with Gary Cooper. That is the closest approximation to Gary Cooper. It's Kevin Costner. It's somebody who does not necessarily have a lot of acting range, but was just born to be a movie star. And in the case of Costner, like his now friend, and they had a little contentiousness on the set of A Perfect World, but similar to Clint Eastwood. Clint Eastwood was a great movie star who turned into arguably a better filmmaker, certainly than he was an actor, but even better filmmaker than he was a movie star, which is crazy. And Kevin Costner is somebody who, just looking at him, you wouldn't assume that he was a dreamer, that he had all kinds of grand plans, but he did. And he was able to not only make the one great movie with Dances with Wolves, but if you ask me what's his second best film, I think Open Range is fantastic. That's another really good Western. But Costner's start, and this is where it's difficult to kind of look at somebody and say, oh, well, you knew that they were going to be a star. There are certain people that have that it factor, that it quality, where it's just a matter of time. You see them in one kind of juicy role like Brad Pitt and Thelma and Louise, you know he's going to be a star. Kevin Costner, the first movie of his that I saw, I didn't really even know that it was him because he wasn't a name yet. But he's a supporting actor in one of the most depressing big studio films, like in history. He made a movie called Testament. Jane Alexander wound up getting an Oscar nomination for Best Actress. There were a number of movies made in the first part of the 1980s dealing with some form of nuclear war and or Armageddon, but not in the manner of Michael Bay with Armageddon or Mimi later with Deep Impact or that level Greenland from a number of years ago. It's not that kind of Armageddon. We mean the Russians sent nukes over, and even if we're not in the blast radius, we're going to die slowly of cancer. You know, in the immortal words of the great comedian Robert Klein, if you live in New York, up to Tuckahoe, New York, you're raisin in 4 seconds. If the blast radius is Times Square. Up to Tuckahoe, New York, you're raisin in 4 seconds. Well, what about where else? Well, if you live in Providence, Rhode Island, you throw up for 9 hours and you die after that. And then the further away you get, the longer it takes for the effects to get to you, to kill you, essentially. So this movie, Testament, Costner, who was probably about 26 or 27 when it was shot, he plays a young father. And the movie is so tragic, it's so devastating, because they didn't really feel the blast that destroyed, presumably the entire eastern seaboard in the world of this movie. They didn't feel it. They didn't seem to experience effects at first. And there's this unbelievable scene where they all realize eventually they're going to die, like probably within a couple of months, if all of the experts are correct, where the town decides to go on with the school play. And it didn't hit the same way seeing the movie not knowing who Kevin Costner was. But if you go back and revisit the film now, the scene with the play, and you look at what Kevin Costner does with his eyes, with his face, he's a supporting character here, but he's almost acting as if he's the star. And maybe for him, that's how he had to do it. He had to comport himself a certain way on screen. And it's really a terrific performance by him. It's one of his broader performances, because again, like Gary Cooper, Costner within a narrow range could be electric. And he knew that, and that's why he took certain roles. And then there were other roles where people would be surprised, such as when he worked with Clint. I guess Clint saw something in Kevin and said, I think you can take this role on. Because in the movie A Perfect World, Kevin basically plays a career criminal. But it's a little bit more complicated than that. But Costner survived this early career slight of being cut almost entirely out of The Big Chill. And yeah, it's his character, I guess, has committed suicide as the film opens, I think. I know that his character has passed. And the cameo is that he's laying there during the memorial service at the very beginning of the film. And my guess is if Kevin had been in the movie more, if he interacted more with Jeff Goldblum and William Hurt, then we would see that he's younger than them, that he looks visibly younger, that even Jeff looks like he's in his 30s, and Kevin looks like maybe he's grad school age of that era. He did an interesting casino blackjack movie called, I think it was Stacy's Nights, and I think that was early 80s, and that was sort of a strange blackjack card counting movie. But he had a different look. He had a different way of delivering his lines. He delivered his lines like the stars of the 40s and 50s. In certain of his early roles, he almost sounds a little like he's giving it a Bogart inflection. He didn't ever deliver his lines the way Gary Cooper with that kind of flat monotone. Even though people thought that Costner had a monotone, some movies it's more apparent than others. But there are some people, he looked like a matinee idol. He's obviously a very attractive man. And he just hit at the right time. And by the time he was in his early 30s, he was already a star. And people presumably thought he was older than he actually was. But in 1987, with him at age 31 and 32, depending on what film was shot when, he had two enormous big-budget studio films in 1987 where he is the lead. Brian De Palma's The Untouchables, fantastic movie, and Sir Sean Connery won his first and only acting Oscar as the Irish cop Jimmy Malone. And he did No Way Out for Roger Donaldson, which is another one of those movies where the human cheat code, and Costner worked with another human cheat code, we'll get to that, but Gene Hackman, the cheat code actor, whatever he's in, he's great. He could take sewer water and turn it into champagne, because Gene Hackman was just one of the most dynamic performers ever on screen. And No Way Out is what you would call a classic political thriller. And Kevin was still young. He was still finding his footing. The fact that he was able to hold his own with Costner is just incredible. But he did. He does. Now, I don't think that film is altogether successful. I believe it falls apart in the third act. A lot of people disagree. And Roger Ebert, for example, had it as one of his best films of 1987. I just think it's the sort of movie that enough people really like, where I always feel comfortable recommending it just because I say, it kind of falls apart in the third act. That doesn't mean you have to listen to me, I'm not going to see it. No. You watch the movie. I'm not the biggest fan of The Usual Suspects. I saw that in theaters, and I thought the third act was catastrophically bad, but I am in the way minority there too. So you form your own conclusions. Now, what I want to say, though, about No Way Out in particular, there is a scene in that movie that is certainly top 10, at least for me, best scenes of any big studio film in the 1980s. So Sean Young, who another performer who looked as if they were going to become a bigger star than they actually did. Sean Young plays a kind of Washington, D.C. society gal. I'm not sure if she's much more than a glorified escort. I don't remember. But she's hooking up with Gene Hackman's Secretary of Defense. Like, Gene Hackman's character is a very significant player in Washington as the Secretary of Defense. And Kevin Costner, his character, Tom Farrell is the name of his character, he meets Sean Young's character at one of these official functions. I don't remember what it was, but it looks like a big ball, essentially. So they meet, and both of them want to get out of there. So before you know it, they get into a limousine, and they tell a limo driver, just, kind of drive around the monuments. Now they start making out, and it's starting to get very, very heated in the back seat of this limo. And I remember adorable little 13-year-old me watching that movie at home on HBO, wondering if Kevin Costner's Tom Farrell had even gotten Sean Young's name. And I was actually thinking that. Did they even introduce, well, they probably just skipped over the fact that they introduced each other, but yeah, they didn't think it was important. So they have about 2 or maybe 3 hours of sex in the back of a limo as the limo just keeps driving around the Washington monuments. And when it's all over, and both of them look as if they've had sex. They both have it, it's written all over them. They're just kind of sitting there in the limo like this. And as if he's reading my mind, Kevin Costner, with that wry smile, that little laconic smile that he became famous for, he gives Sean Young that smile, and he goes, "My name's Tom." And Sean Young quietly goes, "I'm Susan." That was incredible. That is a great movie. You know what's going on. Like, it's not dirty. It wasn't, oh, this is going to be NC-17. Well, there was no NC-17 at that point. But it is a brilliantly orchestrated sequence. It is shot beautifully and tastefully. I'm not trying to be funny. It's shot very tastefully, but it is fantastic. So Costner was strong in that. He's better in No Way Out than The Untouchables. The Untouchables, to me, is a much better movie. But The Untouchables works because the supporting actors are just fantastic. Andy Garcia is fire in a supporting role as one of the people on Elliot Ness's crew. That's who Costner plays. Just terrific. And yeah, a lot of people made a big deal about De Niro as Al Capone, and I just feel like De Niro was having fun. The original idea that Brian De Palma had, he had Bob Hoskins, the late great British actor Bob Hoskins. He had Bob Hoskins on standby. He didn't think that De Niro was gettable. He knew De Niro was making Angel Heart with Sir Alan Parker, and he said, "I don't think we're going to get Bobby, but I'm going to send a cable and we'll see what happens." So Bob Hoskins told this story. He ended up getting paid $1 million just for not doing anything for the month or so when De Palma was trying to get De Niro. He ended up getting, but I got to say, I feel like Bob Hoskins would have been a better choice. De Niro, it's almost a partially comedic performance. I love baseball. He gets to do his usual shtick with the facial expressions. It was funny, put on some weight, shaved his head. You're nothing but a lot of talk and a badge. That's his best moment in the movie. He just stares down Costner. You're nothing but a lot of talk and a badge. Other than that, not so great. Now, here's an irony. Here's an irony with Costner. He's made 3 large-scale, first 2 were very successful in every respect. The third one, not so much, baseball movies. Kevin Costner, like, there are certain people in the movie business that are not just fans of a sport. They really live it and breathe it. And Kevin Costner, he really loves baseball. Like, that's not a joke. He's not pretending to be a fan. He loves baseball. And so in 1988, he made a movie about a minor leaguer named Crash Davis called Bull Durham. It's a film that if you go in with the wrong expectations, it's not going to work because the ads give the idea that the film is going to be different than it is. And I remember people seeing it when it came out in 88 were a little bit disappointed. But it is a film that has gotten better with time, in part because Tim Robbins is in the cast years before Shawshank. And if you just focus on Robbins' performance, he basically walks away with the movie. You can see that was a young actor that, okay, this kid's going places. He is really something. And Costner, even though he's the lead, he's content to kind of let the other actors around him shine. That is actually a really good thing because Clint Eastwood, in many of his roles, tried to do that too because Clint, also a very dominant alpha type screen presence, as was Costner and has been Costner. You know, Costner has that quality you can't quantify called gravitas. Just standing on screen, he has a certain weight. You can't teach it in acting class. He's just one of those people. So Bull Durham was a success at the box office. Critics loved it. Basically, it's about a career minor league catcher who's going for the minor league home run record. You know, the Yankees had a pitcher that they got, a Japanese pitcher named Kei Igawa, who was so terrible with the team that they sent him to the minors. And when he dominated, they refused to call him up because he just sucked so badly as, you know, at the major league level. So he ended up breaking, I think, the minor league win record for the Yankees. So you talk about a Pyrrhic record. That's one of them. But after Bull Durham, Costner made Field of Dreams. And there are many that would have that. I know some people who think it's like the best sports movie ever made. They have it as their favorite sports film. I like it, but I don't love it. And in this case, it's because of another sports film that covers similar terrain that I don't love the film. The true story of Ray Kinsella and the cornfields, the work that everybody does in the film, getting James Earl Jones, a masterstroke for Field of Dreams, and Ray Liotta, it's a really good movie. But if you ask me, do I prefer it to Bull Durham? No, I think Bull Durham's a better movie than Field of Dreams. My problem, if you want to use the word problem with Field of Dreams, is it covers the same territory as John Sayles, the sensational American independent filmmaker I've talked about on the channel. John Sayles did a movie called 8 Men Out, which deals with the scandal, the Black Sox scandal. Say It Ain't So, Joe. And I think Sayles' film is better than Field of Dreams. It's more realistic. It doesn't have the kind of over-the-top, tearjerker tendencies. Not that there's anything wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with a good cry when you go to the movies. Don't get me wrong. But I feel that 8 Men Out is just a superior film. You know, it's just a matter of opinion. That's all. It's just my subjective opinion. But Field of Dreams was super successful at the box office. And then the third baseball movie Costner did was not that great, For Love of the Game, where it's just not good. It's not good. But he was just about the biggest box office draw in Hollywood for a number of years. And when he did Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, kind of had a little bit of the misfortune of ultimately coming up against Arnold Schwarzenegger's Terminator 2. But Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves was a huge hit. I think it was the second biggest box office hit of 1991. I could be wrong about that because T2 was first. But it was certainly in the top 5. And I think it did as well as it did just on the star power of Costner. Because a lot of that movie is very slow and not that much going on. Or as one critic, I think it was Roger Ebert, he said the first half is longer than the Crusades. It takes a long time for that movie to get into gear. And the other problem was, they said that Alan Rickman was so sensational as the Sheriff of Nottingham, they had to cut some of his scenes out because he was taking over the fucking movie. But that's Alan Rickman for you, speaking of late great. What an amazing actor he was. But the thing is, Costner seemed to be able to balance making commercial type projects, such as the movie that he did after Robin Hood, The Bodyguard with Whitney Houston, and the artistic triumphs. And the number one artistic triumph of his life, of his career, was Dances with Wolves. And unfortunately, I love Kevin Costner. I'm a huge fan. I've always been a huge fan. But I just have trouble with the fact that he won what should have been Martin Scorsese's Oscar for Goodfellas. There's nothing wrong with Kevin Costner's direction. Dances with Wolves is a marvelous film, even if some of the themes don't play the same way now as they did 34, 35 years ago. But it's a marvelous film. It is a film of immense beauty, not just visually, but emotionally. I don't have any fault with the film. The problem is simply that Scorsese's Goodfellas is a generational movie. It might be the best crime film ever made. There are those that would put it above Godfather 1 or Godfather 2. And Scorsese should have won the Oscar. You know, they could have split it. It could have been like with 1981 where Warren Beatty got Best Director for Reds and then Chariots of Fire won Best Picture. I feel like it would have been suitable here. But what are you going to do? Costner, though, with The Bodyguard, what an enormous box office hit. And sadly, it was less than 2 decades later that Whitney Houston passed away. And Costner gave the eulogy, and it's almost as if he found new fans. It's such a terrible, tragic thing. And I'm sure that he was honored that they asked him to speak at her funeral, but nobody wanted to be there. It was so awful. And yet he spoke beautifully. And you could say, well, he's an actor, so of course he knows how to do that. But man, that's not easy. There were a lot of people looking at him, and if he had fucked up or if he had not given a great eulogy, what is this guy? What a clown. What an asshole. But he knocked it out of the park. He was extraordinary. The way that he said, we didn't need any kind of an orchestral accompaniment. All we had to do was let Whitney sing. That was more than enough. I mean, truer words were never spoken. What a tribute, but 100% accurate. Now, Costner, as many of you know, recently, within the last number of years, he had the TV show, Yellowstone, and I haven't seen it. I'm just not a big TV watcher. It's just not my thing. But a lot of people love the show, and he did what was supposed to be both released in 2024, the Horizon Saga, another kind of epic, big budget Western. There are certain fans that don't understand why Hollywood even makes Westerns. It's a genre that many people just don't quite get. Then again, you could say the same about musicals, which I studied in, let's just say, very explicit detail when I was at New York University. And a lot of people say, I don't understand the musicals. I don't get it. I understand it maybe on Broadway, but musical films? Well, either you go for musicals or you don't. And it's a similar thing with Westerns. So Costner's Western that he did just over 2 decades ago is another film I want to talk about called Open Range. And he directed it, and it was a movie that did okay at the box office. It got a lot of acclaim, but I feel like the film was still vastly underrated. As a movie, it's almost as good as Dances with Wolves. And it's certainly, from what people are saying about Horizon, it's certainly better than Horizon. There are certain actors, I mentioned Gene Hackman, there are certain actors that are so dependably great that they almost seem like cheat codes. And Gene Hackman is one of them. Robert Duvall is another. And it's ironic that they're both now 94 years old. Both presumably retired. Gene's been retired more than 20 years now. Open Range is a film that it has elements of Shane without being a direct ripoff. If you want a direct ripoff of Shane, check out, and I love him, Clint Eastwood's Pale Rider. It's 75% the same movie. But Open Range showed that despite the big failure, he did a movie called The Postman, which was really bad. There are times where movies come out and bomb, and the critics are kind of lukewarm, and then they say, well, this was okay. The Postman is not a good movie. I'm sorry, it's not a good movie. It's really not a good movie. But Open Range showed that Costner, hadn't lost anything. We know that he hadn't lost anything. But it showed that he could film a more conventional Western with good guys, bad guys, school marms, like the cliche, the character that Annette Bening plays is she's not a school marm, but she's in that ballpark. But where you have sweeping vistas, sweeping horizons, gunfights, and little interesting bits of eccentric character. Or there's this incredible moment in the movie where Robert Duvall's character, Robert Duvall, has he won some kind of a weird tiny little contest in town where they gave him like half a pound of the finest chocolates in the country or something like that. So he's got these chocolates and he's waiting for the right time to eat them, presumably. But they're special chocolates. He doesn't just want to eat them because he's hungry, in other words. So he and Costner are getting ready to have a gunfight. They might die. So as Duvall is sitting there, you're like, what the fuck is he doing? It's like he's opening a wrapper. Costner's like, what's going on over there? He says, well, I figure now's as good a time as any to eat the chocolates. I might not ever get another chance. It's what you call gallows humor, almost literally. But he did make his share of kind of box office flops. And then there were movies that I have always been fans of, such as Wyatt Earp, which was also directed by his friend and frequent collaborator Lawrence Kasdan. But Wyatt Earp, sometimes Hollywood is just a matter of when you open and what else is going on or has gone on in Hollywood. The Wyatt Earp film directed by Lawrence Kasdan, I think, is maybe a notch short of a masterpiece. I think it is a phenomenal film. The problem is Tombstone had come out the previous, was it November or December of '93, and it features the most colorful performance of Val Kilmer's career. I'm your Huckleberry. And the problem with Wyatt Earp is that they attempted to mythologize Wyatt Earp. I got it. But a lot of people didn't give a shit. They didn't think the guy was interesting enough for the mythology. And unfortunately, Lost in the Shuffle was a really incredible Dennis Quaid performance. Unlike Val, who still looked like Val just without the coloring because his character is dying of tuberculosis very slowly. Dennis Quaid, who was already very fit and lean and mean, he dropped about 40 pounds. He's a notch above Christian Bale in The Machinist 10 years later. Dennis Quaid looks like a bone rack that is moving and talking and shooting at people. It is frightening how bad Dennis Quaid, also a very attractive guy, how bad he looks in the movie Wyatt Earp. And then there's a running gag in that film where he keeps calling Wyatt Earp by his full name. He doesn't call him Wyatt, and he doesn't call him Earp, and he doesn't call him Mr. Earp. He just keeps calling him Wyatt Earp. So finally, Costner can't take it anymore. He says, listen, Doc, either call me Wyatt or call me Earp. Stop calling me Wyatt Earp. Wyatt Earp. Just to hear Dennis Quaid, he could have gotten an Oscar nomination just for the number of times he goes, Wyatt Earp. But another one of his disappointments was Waterworld, which was not his fault. It wasn't even the director's fault. The studio decided that they were going to shoot in the middle of the Pacific Ocean in an area where the fact that it was typhoon season, maybe this isn't the best idea. The sets kept getting destroyed. So even though they got a crazed Dennis Hopper, basically it's Frank Booth if Frank Booth was like the Submariner, like some kind of an evil overlord of the seas. That's basically the character that Dennis Hopper plays in Waterworld. They just kind of wasted it. And the movie almost turned a profit. If it had been a normal $75 million budget, it would have been a significant hit, but the film cost between $175 and $225 million. But I give Costner credit because he was honest. After it was all said and done and the film was ready to come out, and he was confident we made a good movie. He was confident they made a good movie. He was right. I think Waterworld is okay. But he was asked the question, knowing what happened, knowing how difficult of a production this was, would you have done it again? And with a straight face, Kevin Costner in 1995 said, no, because I'm not an idiot. I mean, that's kind of on the nose, but I wouldn't have done it again because I'm not an idiot. I don't want to sit there wasting one day after another because it won't stop raining. Kind of funny that weather is impacting motion pictures. Well, don't shoot in the middle of typhoon season in the middle of an area where there are going to be typhoons. 1 + 1 = 2. But I love Costner's performance as Jim Garrison in Oliver Stone's JFK. A fantastic, almost groundbreaking motion picture, pioneering techniques, all the speculation. I mean, a lot of it is gobbledygook, but as a cinematic experience, it's phenomenal. It is a fantastic, brilliant motion picture. So I really like what he does in that film. And it's just, there's too much to kind of chew on for this one guy. I like his turn as Pa Kent. It was kind of polarizing in Man of Steel, but I don't think it was so much his performance as the fact that his character was not written well enough, or they thought his character was presented as a moron, and this is stupid. Why is he doing this? And there's a lot of memes that, when he puts his hand up to Clark, like, just stay where you are. It's really great stuff. But that's the kind of gravitas. Every moment, every line reading by Costner feels bigger than it actually is because it's Costner. And I also, in a more recent film, I really like his performance in Hidden Figures as one of the guys responsible for the space program at NASA, that he was instrumental, at least in the world of the movie, in allowing the three brilliant African-American scientists to actually do their work the way that they were supposed to, or the way that they were capable of working rather than just stick to the old, well, we don't want them here and all of that. So his character is actually really interesting in that film. And that's a part of NASA's history that I had no idea of. It's a movie that covers similar territory to The Right Stuff, the Phil Kaufman film about the first manned space flights. And that's the one with Ed Harris. And in this movie, in Hidden Figures, Ed Harris plays John Glenn in The Right Stuff. And a young Glenn Powell plays John Glenn in Hidden Figures. And he's really good in the movie. That's another guy. You looked at him and you said, that guy, he's going to be a star. It's unmistakable. So Costner now is 70, and unfortunately, his second marriage to Christine Baumgartner ended badly. And I mean, we can make fun and we could joke about, look, the guy's worth 200, 300 million. He'll be fine. I know that. I know that. And he's a successful entrepreneur on top of all the money he's made in the movie business. I know that. But when you are a fan of somebody and they come across as if they've been hurt, speaking of Superman, you can be hurt like an ordinary man. But he came across like a guy who was blindsided, who was in love with his wife, who thought they had a good marriage, and then suddenly woke up one day and she's filing for divorce. That sucks, no matter who you are. But even with the disappointment of Horizon, he seems like he's doing okay. And it did have its defenders. The Rotten Tomatoes score is in the 50s. It's not really very good. And we'll see if Part 2 in any way redeems Part 1. It's always tricky when you have to split up movies like this. We saw it 2 decades ago with Quentin Tarantino having to cut Kill Bill into 2 parts because he made a 4-hour movie. But there was nothing to cut except to split it into 2 parts. You can't release a 4-hour feature. You just can't do it. Clint Eastwood with Flags of Our Fathers, Letters from Iwo Jima. I'm sure there's a supercut that somebody has put together because I don't think that I think that he conceived it as one film, but maybe knew he was always splitting it into 2. I'm not sure about that. But Kevin Costner, a great movie star, a terrific filmmaker, he seems like a pretty humble, all-around guy. And one last thing that I want to point out is in the summer of 2000, there was a lot of activity on a screenplay that I had written set in Flatbush, Brooklyn, during the 8 days of the 1955 World Series. And it was a script that got enough attention where a director of some renown and a producer with pretty good credits, they both got involved. And the script was out to Elijah Wood. Elijah Wood had shown preliminary interest in playing the lead. It's basically a 16-year-old kid, best baseball player in the entire borough, the best teenage baseball player in the borough. And he's being courted for, to sign with any of the local teams, whether it's the Yankees, whether it's the Brooklyn Dodgers. And so we got the script to Kevin Costner. And supposedly, he loved it. But he had just made For Love of the Game. Now, I don't really believe that one had anything to do with the other. But he supposedly loved the script. He wanted to know if he could keep it on his shelves. Now, I didn't talk to him. My manager spoke with his assistant. That's how this came down. But she typed out a nice letter from him, which I wish I had, but I don't. But it basically said, the story was beautifully rendered. This was really terrific. And I wish you the best of success. Maybe at a different time I could have taken this project on, but I just made For Love of the Game. But thank you again for sending it my way. Good luck. Or something like that. I don't remember the exact wording. So I always got a kick out of the fact that on a random Friday or Saturday, sometime in the summer of 2000, it's very likely that Kevin Costner sat there with my 110-page screenplay about a 3-generation family of batshit crazy Brooklyn Dodger fans living in Flatbush, a couple of blocks from Ebbets Field, reading the script and saying, you know what, this is pretty damn good. I hope this guy gets this script made because this is good stuff. So, alas, the script was never made. Elijah Wood went off to do a movie you might have heard of called Lord of the Rings, so he dropped out. Even though he hadn't signed, but there was preliminary interest. When I say he dropped out, it meant that there was no chance he was going to do it. And then the producer and the director, I don't know if they had issues or maybe the stalling momentum from Wood, and there was another actress that had shown preliminary interest and she dropped out, but the film ended up never getting made. And that was 24 and a half years ago. It ain't ever getting made. Would have made a good movie. And I think that Costner probably would have played the father of the main character. That would have been how you would get financing. Again, you think in terms of financing, what role would he play? What would be best for the financiers? It would have been the role of the kid's dad. So a supporting character, but it still would have been It would have been a really good movie, regardless of whether or not Kevin Costner was in it. But that's a story for another day. Happy 70th birthday to Kevin Costner, two-time Oscar winner, three-time Golden Globe winner. It seems like a really nice guy off screen. This has been episode 412 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your rainy, miserable Saturday evening here with me in New York. And if you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.